Hey everybody, welcome to episode 13 of the Hammer and Nails show. I'm Jack Hammer, my co-host Jesse Naylor, and tonight we're welcoming Ben Meyerson and Big Ben from all 49ers to the crew here tonight. And I just got to say real quick before we jump off that the opening, every time I do that thing, it gets me excited. So, and that's all thanks to Jesse. He put that together for me about a month or so ago, and that thing just always rocks and gets me fired up to do a show. So thanks for that, Jesse. How you guys doing tonight?
I'm doing great. Jack, that was really pumping me up when I was watching that, man. I'm getting excited here. Like that music was getting me going. Those highlights were awesome. That was a good job, Jesse. I really enjoyed that one.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it. Yeah, man. I'm ready to go. I think we got a very good list of topics for tonight, so I'm actually pretty excited to get this thing going.
Yeah, and it's perfect. It's funny. You start trying to put these shows together on a weekly basis, or sometimes all of us are doing shows throughout the week as well. And we're always wondering if there's going to be topics that happen, right? And you just got to really thank Kyle Shanahan and the 49ers because they're just the gift that keeps on giving for shows like this, because it's constantly something happening in 49er land. And today we had the news break that. We knew that the 49ers had a little bit of trouble during their OTA period, and we had heard that there was some pushback from the NFL regarding them breaking some rules. And today it came down that they were actually fined $100,000. Kyle Shanahan was fined $50,000, and that was part of the reason the NFL actually shut down their OTAs and took away their last OTA period. So definitely some interesting things. What are your thoughts on that from you guys?
So, honestly, I don't really take that much away from those fines coming down today. It's, a lot more of stuff we already knew, right? We knew the 49ers practices got canceled by the league. We knew that they did something wrong in practice. Honestly, to me, it's not the fines that matter as much as the information. And there just hasn't been a lot of information released about why specifically they were fining the team. So I hope the next day or two the NFL is going to give us a little more info on what specific rule the 49ers broke or what specific policy that they didn't follow. So once we get that kind of information, I think we'll have a lot more to talk about. We'll actually be able to understand why the league was coming down hard on the Niners here. But they were one of three teams that got some of these fines that were handed out today. So, I think and from what I understand, guys, this is something we kind of knew was coming already, if I'm not misunderstanding the whole situation.
I think you're right. I think this was the defiance to what we had heard about a little bit about a month or so ago, a few weeks ago when it first went down. How about you, Jesse?
Yeah, for me, I mean, nothing crazy, nothing that surprising, but my mind immediately goes back to, at what point does Shanahan get some culpability for the injuries that are on this team? I mean, people are pissed that I bring it up, and I brought it up on Twitter and been having some really good back and forths, some intelligent back and forths. But, people really get up in arms when you want to call out coach or question anything that he does. Like he's been perfect, and he hasn't. I love Shanahan. He's certainly probably a top 7 coach in my mind, but there are things that he has flaws about. And when you have players from other teams come out and say that they practice too hard, now you've got fines for it. You're missing really important time, especially for some of these young guys to get in the building and learn the offense and just learn how to be pros. And that gets taken away from you, especially when a lot of these guys are second-year players and got none of that last year. That's an important week that I think was missed out on. Now, is it going to be the difference in winning and not winning in week 7? Probably not. But to me, it's just adding. It's just snowballing on the fact that there are legitimate concerns injury-wise with this team. And I think that to me, it just raises some more red flags. But
yeah, no, definitely. I think it definitely raises the red flags and that injury concern and that piece that you bring up, Jesse. I think that's 100% valid when you take into consideration everything that's going on with this team in the last 4 years, and to have them getting hit by the league for these violations. I think it's a big deal. I think people are kind of glossing over it because it's in the off season and it's the fine and the punishment wasn't really overly tough, but this stuff plays a role in why they've had so many issues with injuries over the last 4 years. And for me, beyond just that, I think the one thing that I kind of took away with it, or the question I had is why did Kyle Shanahan go up there and really not say the truth about what was happening at the end of the, with what was going on? That's the piece for me, because he went up and acted like he had planned this all along, when in fact it was the NFL that was taking it away from him. So what really did the 49ers get out of doing that? And then you kind of throw in on top of that, from the whole way that the draft went down, and kind of the snickering at the national media with the mistakes that they've made in terms of the quarterback situation. And it just really seems like a kind of a strange way to be kind of handling this with the PR and that kind of thing, and from an organization that's usually really cautious about that kind of stuff. So those are kind of my takeaways. And then one other thing, and I mentioned this on Twitter today, is when is Jed York going to get tired of covering up for Kyle Shanahan's mistakes? This is now $350,000 in fines he's having to cut checks for since September for rules violations. So at what point does that become an issue? Those are my takeaways on it.
Yeah, and I think in terms of the PR thing, kind of just going back to that, Jack, you just wonder why the 49ers haven't said much. Like kind of what you were saying, they don't seem to be, overly communicative right now about this issue. And if I was an NFL team, I would be trying to get out in front of this. I would be letting the fans know exactly what was happening. I would have a PR release that actually informed them about what was going on than some just cookie cutter press release. So I just wonder, kind of like what you guys were saying a second ago, when are the 49ers going to take more responsibility with this kind of stuff and understand that this does affect the fans? And I think just going to what you said, Jack, people are glossing over it a little bit and kind of are giving the team not a break, but people aren't talking about it as much as you would expect them to. So I just wonder how much responsibility this team is willing to take with this kind of issue, or maybe it might just be something where it's a little issue, but no matter what it is, the fans should know what's going on. And I think it's weird that there's kind of this, I don't want to say misinformation around it, but they're certainly not being overly truthful about what went down.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, to me, there's just an arrogance about Kyle Shanahan that I frankly, I don't know. I don't enjoy it. I like that he's confident. I like confidence and all that, but it just seems to me like maybe I'm reading the situation wrong, but I feel like he's driving a wedge between the fan base a little bit and then also between he and Lynch, in my personal opinion, right? Because what's happening is there's a group of people that think that Shanahan can do no wrong, no matter what. He's never at fault. The injuries, not his fault. The players drafted, not his fault. Fourth oldest roster, now second oldest roster, not his fault. Super Bowl play calling, not his fault, right? Like that's a big chunk of the fan base. And then there's people like myself that are critical of all those things, right? And so there's a wedge driven in the fan base. But then when you watch the way that he conducts himself at press conferences and things like that, and yesterday, and I know that we'll get a little bit further into it, but yesterday you have Lynch talking and basically saying this team's primed and ready to win. And then you got Shanahan coming out and saying, well, we have a lot of work to do, basically contradicting everything that his GM just said. I don't know. I just feel like he's got an arrogance about him and feels like he can do no wrong and he's smarter than everybody, and the fan base is eating it up. So we'll see how long they eat it up for.
Yeah. The last thing I'm going to just say on this one is that our colleague with all 49ers, East Bay Chris, he put out an article back in June, and I just retweeted it for everybody in the middle of the month, and it was basically stating that the 49ers have an accountability problem, and I think that that's really what this gets down to. And so I just kind of I retweeted that. I just wanted to kind of shout that out because that was a really good article at the time, and I know that he got some heat for that. But I mean, this is just another example of what he was getting at on that. And so instead of coming up and saying my own thing, that was, got to give Chris a shout for that because that was a really good article that he put out, and I think people should go back and revisit that one. So changing gears, Jesse, you kind of mentioned it a minute ago. They did have the state of the franchise yesterday. What were your thoughts on it? What were some of your takeaways? Maybe your number one or two takeaways that you got out of it?
Yeah, I mentioned that right there. That little back and forth was very interesting to me, and I think that Lynch is coming out and being very strategic about what he's saying. He's basically, I think he knows that if they have a losing season, he's the one that's gone, right? But he's telling the fans, listen, I've put the product on the field that can go out and win. It's up to the coach to take the reins from here, is basically where he left it. And Shanahan coming out and saying, well, I mean, you know, there's a lot of work that needs to be done and everybody's got to get better. And they just had two different stances and it didn't seem like they were on the same page. And then I would say the other thing that stood out to me was there was no mention of either QB by anybody the whole time. Not a single mention of a QB being brought up at all. And not Lance, not Garoppolo. You had George Kittle and Fred Warner talking about every single element of this team, and they just glossed over the QB situation. And so to me, that validates kind of what we've been saying for a long time, that there is a legit open QB competition. Whether you think Jimmy's going to win, whether you think Lance is going to win, there's a legit competition, and nobody wants to pick sides right now. So that's the way that I saw that.
Yeah, I guess the way I kind of read the whole situation is a little bit kind of like what Jesse was saying, which is that Shanahan was doing his job, Lynch was doing his job, and they were explaining why they were both in the position that they were in. I think everybody was hanging on to that bit about 2019 the most, right? Them comparing the two teams. But, you know, the thing I caught on to was actually right before they said this, or before Greg Papa asked them that question, was Kyle specifically said that he felt like after seeing what happened last year, seeing what went down with the team, knowing that the salary cap was going to get, you know, shortened, that everything was kind of going the way it was going, that he felt that, oh, this is our Super Bowl window closing kind of right in front of us. And he didn't say it that way, but the way Shanahan explained it is, you know, with everything going on, that window isn't as wide as they thought it was. So to me, when I hear that, that's a good amount of self-awareness from Shanahan that we frankly don't see from the messages from the front office, where they keep talking about winning now and they're signing guys to one-year deals, and it's all about 2021 versus, like I said, with Shanahan, it seems like he understands the long-term picture, and he understands that getting Trey Lance in and having Trey Lance develop is what's going to lead them to a Super Bowl, and that the way that they had their philosophy going into last offseason after the Super Bowl, just in general with the fan base too, this, oh, we're going to go on the revenge tour. We just need to plug a hole here or plug a hole there, you know, replace Joe Staley, replace Emmanuel Sanders. To me, that was the first time I've really heard Kyle say something other than, hey, we should just run it back, or 2019 is the way things should have been going, and this is how we need to keep going. So I thought that was kind of refreshing from Shanahan in that sense, that he seems self-aware and he recognizes the stage that this team is at right now.
Can I address this comment by Jeremy over here real quick?
Which one is it?
Second one down, the 944.
You want that one where he says that Jimmy's going to take us to the Super Bowl?
No. The 944. They said nothing about the QBs right there.
Yeah.
In what I just said, when did I ever say that Trey Lance was good? I mean, I know that I'm known for saying that Trey Lance is going to be the starter. That's my personal opinion. But in what I just said, I never said that leads to him being the starter week one. I said it leads to there being an open QB competition. And whether you think Jimmy or Trey Lance is going to be the guy, that's irrelevant. It tells me there's a QB competition and nobody wants to take sides. I never once said that means that Lance is going to be the starter week one. So I'm not sure where that came from.
Yeah, no, Jeremy's a big Jimmy Garoppolo guy, and that's good. I mean, when I watched I watched it live at 6:00, and you know, I didn't take a ton away from it. It was, you know, the things that I would say that I took away from is they're extremely excited to have people back in the stands. They hammered that point home over and over and over again. That was probably about half of the show, and then you had the Lynch and the Shanahan piece. And it was kind of interesting that they have a little bit difference of opinion, and it makes sense to an extent. I agree with Kyle Shanahan, quite frankly. I think that at this point you can't say that they're better than that 2019 team. You're banking that on a lot of unproven guys. So, you know, in a way, his response there really almost puts more pressure on John Lynch, because, you know, you're the one that put this recipe to get, put these ingredients together for me, and we're going to find out if these guys are as good as you think they are. And, if they're not, then you're going to have to give me a little bit more time to work on it. That's kind of the way that came down to me. And beyond that, I really liked what Fred Warner had to say. Fred Warner came off as a leader in his own right, but he definitely pointed out to D'Amico Ryans as being a leader, and the leadership style and the way that what he brings to the table. And he's never been a coordinator before, but you've got Fred Warner already talking him up as a guy that's going to become a head coach quickly in the NFL. And so I think that really plays well for the 49ers going into this season with some of the questions around the defense and that change at that spot in the coaching staff. So the fact that he already has the buy-in from really the best player on the defensive side, that's great. And then the one other thing this is kind of a goofy thing, but they've got to do something about those socks. I mentioned this earlier today. I mentioned this on Twitter, and I understand. When you look at it, I kind of tweeted this out last night, and you look at they all have these. I didn't realize that all of them had this until later on. But you see Jimmy Garoppolo standing next to Jerry Rice, and Jimmy Garoppolo looks like he's standing there in tights, and Jerry Rice looks like he's the one that's wearing it better, right? So they've got to either get red socks underneath those things, or they got to at least get those little red stripes that they had back, which were actually part of that uniform in 1994. So they've got to do that. So I'm putting it out there again. I'm hoping that somebody from the 49ers sees this and says, we've got to make this change because we can throw this together in a month.
What was up with Jimmy wearing a glove too? Have you ever seen him wear a glove?
That was weird, right? I that didn't make any sense to me.
I mean, it could just be like a fashion thing for the shoot, but I was like, wait a minute, is this a new thing? Like now you've got a glove on your offhand. Is that gonna fix all the woes, Jimmy? Is that where we're at mentally? That's where my mind went.
Well, and those red 94 jerseys look clean.
They're so fire. They really my do. Gosh, they're so fire.
I'm eyeing that number 11 Ayuk right now, personally. But no, and you know what, too? If it really comes down to it, and I got to go out and campaign for this, why don't we get some of those throwback jerseys? Let us get a Jerry Rice. I want to get myself a Dion, because I got to rep my guy. And in that red jersey would be great. So, hey, Niners, if you're watching this, let's make something happen. I can do business. I'm a businessman, so we can work something out.
Yeah. And then the one thing that was kind of funny about that whole thing is how often Jimmy Garoppolo showed up in that video, right? And there's all kinds of different. You can make all kinds of different judgments based off of that. And I saw it. When I saw it, I was like, well, you could tell that the majority of this whole thing, production was shot at earlier on. So at what point did they actually shoot this? That could have been something they shot, right after the season finished, early on in the off season, and who knows? But they made
The worst kept secret has been those throwback red jerseys, right? I mean, I saw Instagram reporters reporting stuff like oh, the 49ers are going to wear these jerseys months ago. So yeah, Jack, I think you're right. This is something that everybody's looking back or looking at it as it's happening, but in reality, I don't think it happened recently at all. And if it did, it's kind of crazy, the 49ers, the way they went about it. But it has to be pre-recorded at least a month or two ahead of time, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's interesting, and it brings up a lot of things like, why is Jimmy Garoppolo in there so much? And it was mentioned, you guys, I think, talked about it at one point. Jimmy's in there quite a bit, and I think what it leads me to think is, the 49ers really, are they just pumping up Jimmy? Are they just trying to pump up his value by showing him how much that they want him to be a part of their franchise moving forward, or where does that really stand?
I'm sure some people took it as he's the starter too. I mean, you can go either way with it. Lots of speculation to be drawn.
Yeah, no, I definitely saw that.
The 49ers have really enjoyed the game of I show you one thing, you make two different things out of it depending on what your opinion are this offseason. They've done a really great job of confusing people. Yeah.
I had to laugh also because I'm the oldest guy in the room here, and so I was at Candlestick Park throughout 1994. So those jerseys weren't new to me, and I had to laugh. At this morning, listened to KNBR, and Matt Maiocco was on there, and he made a really good point. These aren't the 1994 throwbacks. These are actually the 1955 throwbacks. That was his. He was really quote angry. He was joking around, obviously, but that's really where these jerseys come from, right? Is the 1955 team, but
Yeah.
At this point, not too many guys that were around in 1955 are as tied into the 49ers as the 94 younger crowd will be. So it makes sense. Let's kind of switch gears a little bit, and I know we've wanted to get into kind of have a little bit of a fun conversation tonight about some other topics outside of just the state of the union or state of the franchise and the issues that the teams have, and focus on some fun stuff. And so one of the topics that we wanted to go over was the 49ers Mount Rushmore. And we kind of wanted to break this up, though, because the 49ers have a rich tradition, and you can go through all kinds of – they have really different eras. Putting only 4 guys on the mountain is tough. So Jesse and I went out. We bought 3 separate mountains, actually 4, that we're going to go ahead and carve 49ers Mount Rushmores out here in the valley. So we wanted to start with we're going to do an 80s. We'll do one for the 90s, and we'll do one for the 2000s, and then we'll also do an overall. So those are our 4 mountains that we're going to be building. So let's start with the 80s. Who do you guys have for your 1980s 49ers Mount Rushmore?
I'll go first. So for me, you're going to notice a major omission of a player, and that's because I didn't want to put him in the 80s and the 90s. I thought that was a cop-out. So I had to put him in the 90s because he played every single year in the 90s. He didn't play every single year in the 80s. So that's going to be Jerry Rice. You're not going to see him on this list. So, don't fret. He'll show up. But for me, the 80s is Joe Montana, Roger Craig, Ronnie Lott, and Bill Walsh. And I feel like you cannot have a Mount Rushmore without the guy who drove everything, and that was Bill Walsh. I mean, you're talking about a guy that his offense, in the tree of his offense, is still dominant in the league 40 years later. That's absolutely crazy. So Bill Walsh definitely has to be there. Ronnie Lott, to me, is probably the best safety of all time. Joe Montana, I mean, up until recently was seen as the greatest quarterback of all time in most people's eyes. And then Roger Craig, I mean, not enough can be said about Roger Craig. 1,000 yards receiving, 1,000 yards rushing. It didn't matter. He made things happen. And, there were drives late in seasons and even in the Super Bowl where they just went to him over and over and over and over, and he kept delivering. So, yeah, for me, those are the 4 guys that I have for the 1980s Mount Rushmore.
So for the 80s, I'm going to go pretty similar to Jesse with one change. So I did originally write down Jerry Rice, but you know what? Like you said, let's get him to the 90s. That's where he belongs. And I'm not going to put him on 2 mountains. So I'll do Joe Montana, Ronnie Lott, Bill Walsh, Dwight Clark, man. I'm sure Jesse, the next guy you were thinking about on your list.
He was.
And for me, because of how iconic the moment was, because of how much that defined the beginning of the kickoff of this franchise and everything that would become moving forward, I think you got to keep Dwight Clark on that mountain. And I'm a huge Ronnie Lott fan. I think one of the things that attracted me to the 49ers initially was, I was a fan. I was in high school. I was trying to learn more about teams in the NFL, and then I read that story about Ronnie Lott getting his finger cut off, and you hear that kind of stuff, man, it just gets you fired up. So I'm just a huge Ronnie Lott fan, and obviously, Bill Walsh too, Jesse, you covered that. Just not only all the modern things for the NFL that he did, but to me, he was the first real character that was an NFL coach. He showed his heart on his sleeve. He talks about it, not obviously now, but after he retired, he talked about how depressed he was after he had lost his first couple seasons with the 49ers coach. There's that great NFL Films documentary. There's a great book that he wrote that everyone should go check out if you have the chance. But I love Bill Walsh. I love learning more and more about him as much as possible. And I think we're probably going to come up with some similar lists, but Bill Walsh, I think we're going to be talking about overall Mount Rushmores. it's going to be one or two on probably most people's list for the 49ers.
Yeah, I agree with both of you. There's going to be a lot of our lists are going to be similar. For me, Bill Walsh is right there. He's going to be on my Mount Rushmore for the 80s. Obviously, he led the 49ers to 3 Super Bowls. He was the most dominant head coach in that era, and really was instrumental in creating a whole different version of offense in the NFL. Or kind of really taking some stuff that he had learned in the 70s and really taking it to the next level. And then from there, I'm going with Eddie DeBartolo. He's got to be on here. And I probably would put Eddie DeBartolo first before Bill Walsh. And the only reason I do that is because he's the one that actually hired Bill Walsh. He's the one that figured it out in '79 and hired him, after some mistakes at the beginning of his time as the owner. And then he kind of revolutionized and changed the whole way that people look at owners with some of the things that he did for the players. And, the way that he treated them and continues to treat them. Those guys that played for him are still getting help from him now, even now, and would love to have him. They do anything for him. So that really speaks volumes for the type of person and owner that he was for the 49ers during his run with the organization. And then the 2 players that I have are I think you guys both said them: Joe Montana, Jerry Rice. Joe Montana to me is the greatest quarterback of all time. I think if you took Montana out of the 80s and put him in this era, the numbers would be outstanding. Just he is he's an athletic quarterback. He's a guy that beats you in the pocket but can move his feet and run around, and you just watch him make plays, and it's just amazing. And then Ronnie Lott, you can't get. There's nobody. Everybody. Ronnie Lott was a guy that could go out there and he could play cornerback and then transitioned over to safety, at the back half of the 90s, and just what an unbelievable football player and just the heartbeat of that team, and fantastic. So he's got to be right there at the end of that group for us.
I actually met Ronnie Lott in 2019. I went down to Miami for the Super Bowl festivities and stood in line, met him, took a picture with him, got his autograph. It's pretty cool. Super nice guy.
Yeah. I'll throw mine out there since you mentioned that. I actually was at Candlestick in '81 when they beat the Giants in the regular season to clinch the NFC West. We had our seats were in I guess it was the north end zone, that side where the big board was, and we were down low. They won the game and everybody started storming the field. I was only like 6 or 7 years old, and we were there with some friends, and my dad's friend grabbed me and we took off running across the field. And if you ever watch any of the videos from the '81 season, you'll notice when they went after that game, there's a big sea of people on there, and they've got Ronnie Lott up on their shoulders.
Yeah.
Anyway, I was in that mosh pit of people, and I slapped him on the leg, and he would never, Anyway, that was a cool.
That's awesome, though. That's so cool.
Yeah.
That is cool, man.
That's one of my claims to fame when it comes to Candlestick Park and the 49ers. So. Let's transition to the 1990s. So who do we have for the 1990s? Our Mount Rushmore of the 49ers.
So I can go first for this one, and I'll admit I kind of cheated a little bit because I had 3 who were definitely on there, and then Jack, you kind of gave me my last answer because I didn't even consider it. But I'm gonna put Eddie DeBartolo on this list for the 90s, and I'll put him specifically on the 90s over the 80s, even though I just admitted to not thinking about him. I'm being honest right now, because specifically you look at that 1994 team, what he did to get that team put together, the money he was willing to put into the franchise then to take them over to the hump. To me, I mean, yeah, the hiring of Bill Walsh is super important, but that's one of the defining things of DeBartolo's legacy with the 49ers, that willingness to be all for the players, like Jack was saying, and to really transform the way ownership works, and not just only the NFL, but across sports. So you got to give Eddie D a lot of credit. I mean, yeah, really an exceptional owner. I mean, yeah, you said it. I think that's Korean 49er in the comments who's saying this. I mean, absolutely defined the gold standard for what owners should be in the NFL. And the next 3 guys I'm going to go with are, of course, you got to go with Jerry Rice, the GOAT himself. I think you guys probably have. I'm not going to pretend like I'm the most expert Jerry Rice person in the world, but here's what I will say about Jerry Rice real quick is I think he, to me, is like one of those guys, if you could go in a time machine and and get his single game statistics for fantasy football, Jerry Rice would be one of the most popular NFL players in history because of how many people's leagues he would win. I mean, Jack, you yourself are smiling right now because you know about these ridiculous stat lines where it's like 220 yards, 3 touchdowns, 180 yards, a touchdown, all that crazy stuff. So then the last guy on my list, I'm going to go with Ricky Waters. I feel like those 3 players are kind of the 3 obvious players that make the most sense for this list.
Okay. Yeah, so for me, I'm going to go Jerry Rice. Like I said, I didn't have him on the 80s. I got to have him on the 90s. Played every single year for the 49ers in the 90s, the greatest wide receiver of all time, probably the greatest football player of all time. So definitely has to be on the list. Bryant Young, this was a guy that was inducted last year, and we'll actually get to see it on the field for the 49ers Ring of Honor. So yeah, Bryant Young, to me, he was an absolute game changer along that defensive line. Great player, one of my favorites to watch play. Merton Hanks, this one I battled with, but Merton Hanks, to me, I mean, the chicken dance, and he was a difference maker as well. I mean, he was there for a majority of that. He held that secondary together for many, many years, was a very good player. And like I said, just because of the chicken dance alone, he has to be there. And then my favorite player of all time, the reason that I learned to throw left-handed, is Steve Young. So I have him, I believe, number 9 on my all-time list of quarterbacks. And just like I said, my favorite player, and obviously deserves to be on that 90s roster or Mount Rushmore.
Yeah, this is a fun one because we definitely have a little bit different view on this one, but I think we definitely all have some similarities. I have Steve Young as well. He's the first one because he was during his period when he's the 90s were his time. I know he had some plays in the 80s, but he took over in 91, and from 92 till 98, that period, basically the meat and potatoes of the 90s was Steve Young being really at the top of the NFL, just doing things that hadn't been seen before. It would have been nice to have seen him be able to get over the hump a couple of times to get in there and win the Super Bowl, but they had the Cowboys and they finally got over that hurdle in '94, and his Super Bowl game was one of the all-time best. So it's definitely Steve Young first. Jerry Rice, obviously, greatest of all time. I think one of the best football players ever. He's on the list, and I put him in the 90s too because same reason that Jesse did. I didn't want him to have him in 2 different eras there, so I kept him in that one. For my third choice, I went with Bryant Young. BY was an absolute beast in the middle. They had I think he came along the year before. I think they had drafted Dana Stubblefield, and once they went and got Bryant Young the next year, that middle, that interior, that defensive line really took off and just did really well. So those are those 3, and then the last one, and this I'm kind of glad that nobody went this direction because this was I get to be on my own on this one. I'm going with Jesse Sapolu as my 4th. And the reason I did that is Sapolu was just the rock and one of the rocks up front for the 49ers offensive line throughout the 90s. I think his last season was 97, might have been 98, but he was there. He started a couple of years in the 80s, 88, 89, but he was just there all the way through. Just a tremendous football player, tremendous offensive lineman. I think he was drafted in the 11th round back. 11th round, yeah. And for him to have the career that he had, I think you got to put him up there as well and give him that recognition I think he deserves for the career that he had with the 49ers. Yeah, he was definitely a great player, and talk about value, 11th round pick, lifetime starter. I mean, yeah, very good player. Yeah. I saw some people say Deion Sanders, he was only there for 1 year. Definitely not putting him there for the 1 year.
Dude, I'm the biggest FSU fan. I'm going to put a harsh no on that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a no just because you can't do it because it was only one season. I think he missed up the first 2 games of the season or something like that. I like Korean 49ers though here with John Taylor. He's definitely
that's a good underrated one.
Yeah, he's an underrated guy. And last night when that call came down that he had made it, I went back because I tweeted out some stuff earlier in the year about Brandon Ayuk. If the 49ers could have him be like John Taylor, they'd be good. And I got some pushback on that. And I don't think that there's a lot of people who really realize how good John Taylor was from '88 on. In '88 he didn't really catch the ball a whole lot. He was mostly a punt returner, but he did win the Super Bowl. And in '88 he had a punt return on Monday Night Football against Washington that really. At that point in the season, the Niners were struggling and really set them off to a path to get to the playoffs and the championship that year. Harold asks about Seifert. I struggle with George Seifert a little bit. He had a great career with the 49ers. My question is how much of that was because of the product that had been put together by Bill Walsh. The farther he got away from Bill Walsh, the further it seemed like he struggled. I don't know about the two of you, but that was the reason why I left him off.
Yeah, somebody said Charles Haley as well, and I was this close to putting him on my 80s, but the way that his career fell, it was just so weird. He only had a few years in the 80s. He only had a few years in the 90s with the 49ers. He was mostly with the Cowboys during the 90s, so I couldn't put him on a 90s team. And he just didn't have enough years in the 80s for me to justify it. But as far as being an absolute wrecker and a game changer, I mean, to me, he's more of the reason the 49ers won a Super Bowl in '94. I know that Deion gets all the credit, but to me, it was Haley. And had they kept Haley and probably Waters and let Deion walk to Dallas, they still could have beaten Dallas, in my opinion.
Yeah. I just wanted to say one underrated executive who kind of I forgot about and then just re-remembered was John McVay. I think he probably doesn't make any of our lists, but I mean, a guy who was hugely important to the 49ers' success in the 80s and 90s, and obviously grandfather of Sean McVay. But I thought that's another interesting name if we're talking about non-football players that we were considering for this list.
Yeah, exactly. And then our good friend Walruna, I threw this up a little bit ago, but he says that Ben Henry Nayls should be the name of the show. That's actually pretty funny. I know Jesse was in the middle of talking when I first put that up, and that's pretty darn funny right there. So that's I think so that kind of gets us through to the 2000s. Who do you guys have for your Mount Rushmore of the 2000s for the 49ers? I think this one might have been a little tougher for us.
Yeah, this one was tough. So just to be clear, it's from 2000 through today is what we did. We didn't do just the 2000s and then move on from 2010. By the way, if you want to do just the 2000s, good luck. That's extremely hard to do. But that being said, 2000 through today, I've got Joe Staley. I mean, the anchor to the left side of that line for so many years definitely has to be on there. Frank Gore. I mean, need I say any more? Guy is an absolute beast. Arguably the best running back in our franchise's history. I say arguably. It is debatable. Patrick Willis, I mean, outside of Ray Lewis, may be the best linebacker of all time. And Jim Harbaugh. I mean, before Harbaugh got here, this team was not looking good. And they were on a tailspin that I didn't know if they would ever get out of, it felt like. So when Jim Harbaugh took over the team, it was a whole different ball game. From taking Alex Smith and letting him gain his confidence to getting us to 3 straight NFC title games, once to a Super Bowl, the culture was completely changed. So I have to give him his credit.
Yeah, I went with a pretty similar list, and to start, I think I got to go with the guy who's been really responsible for the 49ers, who's Jed York. No, I'm kidding. I'm joking. I just had to throw that out there for everyone for a second to mess around. No, you know what? My list is pretty similar to yours, Jesse. I'm just gonna hit the highlights real quick. Frank Gore, of course. I mean, you mentioned that greatest running back franchise history, most important player of the 2000s on, in my opinion, for this team, at least thus far. Hopefully that changes with Trey Lance. Then next, I'm going to go with Joe Staley too. I mean, like you said, Jesse, he's been anchoring this left side of the 49ers offensive line. I mean, really, I'm my entire life, my entire time watching football, he's been the most consistent thing that the 49ers have had. And just looking at what he did, all the injuries he battled through, even going to that 2019 season, really was heroic to me, seeing what he went through by the end of his career. Then I'm going to go with Patrick Willis. You mentioned Jesse. I mean, one of the greatest linebackers of all time, certified Hall of Famer, no doubt. And then I'll go with Justin Smith. I saw Korean 49er put this list out there too. I gotta go with one of the Smith brothers, so that's where I'll end that list. But I'm curious, what do you think of Jack? I see you smiling.
Can I say something just real quick? I want to let you know that as I made this list, Smith was on there for a minute, Bowman was on there for a minute, and then they both ended up not being on there. So it was that close. There's a lot of guys you could choose from. If we could choose 5 guys like Jeremy's doing, I mean, not fair, buddy. What are you doing over there? There's only 4 people on Mount Rushmore. You don't get a 5th player. You're cheating. So who do you take off? Do you take off Navarro? Do you take off Harbaugh? Because I think we all have to agree that Gore, Staley, and Willis have got to be on there. So anyways, go ahead, Jack.
Well, I mean, hey, I'm the only one out here campaigning for Jed York also. I mean, come on. A legend with the 49ers, really responsible for everything that's happened so far.
Well, I think the 2000s, you've got to have Frank Gore's got to be on there. I mean, he was just an Iron Man throughout the 2000s, right? He started in, what was it, 05, and he was with the team through 14. I think it was 14 his last year. Mm-hmm. So about 9-10 years right there in the middle of the 2000s, and he's going to be one of the best of all time by the time. I think he's third in the all time right now in yards, third or fourth.
Third all time, I believe. Yeah.
Yeah, and his numbers were just amazing. Especially in the beginning of his career. That year he had his second year season with the Niners was an all timer. So Frank Gore's got to be first, and then Patrick Willis. Those are the 2 easy ones, right? Patrick Willis he should be in the Hall of Fame here in the next couple of years, I think. Just an unbelievable linebacker, sideline to sideline, to make plays all over the field. So those are the top 2, and then from there it gets tricky. Because at one point I had Harbaugh on my list. I took him off. I actually put Justin Smith back on there as the guy. I know he played a long time with the Bengals, but his time in San Francisco was instrumental in the run that they put together from 2011 to 2013, that 3-year stretch. And I think if they had a decent head coach, they probably would have been in the playoffs in 9 and 10. I mean, they were a pretty good team both of those years, and they just couldn't win because their coaching was bad. And so I guess I should have put Jim Harbaugh on that list, right? But I didn't. I went with Joe Staley as my 4th because, again, just a rock that was there for so long. So those are the 4 for me.
I think those 3, Staley, Gore, and Willis, those are a lock. It's that 4th one is definitely questionable. I mean, from Bowman to Harbaugh to Smith, as you guys said. There's multiple guys. Vernon Davis comes to mind as a guy that you could possibly put on there. So yeah, there's a lot of guys.
No C.J. Beathard or Trent Taylor Love. I mean, come on, guys.
That
I
is
feel like I'm on an island over here.
Well, I should go with Jimmy. I mean, Jimmy did lead the 49ers to the second Super Bowl that they lost in the 2000s. So Jimmy could have made that list. Just kind of looking over there to see what we have. The one thing that, Navarro Bowman comes up. The reason that I didn't put Navarro Bowman on this list was his time was really short. He was there in 12 and 13, but in 13 he got hurt, and he didn't play at all in 14, right? So that's kind of why I didn't put him on there. His run was just too short for me to put on the Mount Rushmore list. So, like Jeremy says here, our Mount Rushmore is bigger. It can hold an extra guy. Didn't we just have a president a couple years ago that said there should be like 5 or 6? I think he wanted to have up there as well. Add a 5th guy to Mount Rushmore. So, Jeremy's right there with the Donald on that one. So that's where we are. Anybody else? You guys had any more comments on that really quick with the Mount Rushmore piece?
No, I don't think so. I was going to say, how about we start making our large 49ers Mount Rushmore? And I was going to say we can be more collaborative on this one because I don't think any of us really prepared for this one ahead of time. But but I do want to put out the first name. I'll put the first nomination for the 49ers total Mount Rushmore. It's got to be Bill Walsh. I think it has to be Bill Walsh.
Yes.
I don't think I'll find any pushback on that either. What Bill Walsh did to launch this franchise into the success that they eventually got into, he's just going to be a 49ers legend forever. And one piece of this that I really want to make sure I emphasize for people, and one of the parts I really found endearing and which made me love Bill Walsh even more is the social aspect, his work with Dr. Harry Edwards, what they did in the 80s, how he understood that the relationship between the players and the coaches and the organization, it matters. And that whole family atmosphere, that idea of catering to these young black athletes who are coming from obviously all kinds of different diverse backgrounds, but I think really bringing in Dr. Harry Edwards, just all the social change that Bill Walsh did on top of everything he was already doing, just shows you how much of a leader that guy was.
Yeah, absolutely. You want to nominate the second one, Jack? First of all, do you have any disagreement? Walsh has to be on there? Or?
No, I don't have any disagreement there. I think I think what I was going to say is it goes right back to my original Mount Rushmore. I think you have to have DeBartolo on there. As also kind of for the same reason, you kind of have Walsh and DeBartolo. Those are the guys that kind of built it. Those are kind of almost like your George Washington, Abraham Lincoln kind of characters on the Mount Rushmore. I think you have to start with those two as the leaders, and then that makes it really tough though when you start to get into the two remaining spots.
Whew. I actually, now that we're talking about this, I don't think it is too tough. I mean, let's. I see Jesse's face right now, but Jesse, you can. How about this? You make the next nomination, but we're gonna put two more people on this list. Personally, I think there's an obvious two.
Yeah, I'm not gonna argue with the Eddie D just because.
No.
Yeah, I definitely left him off my list, but that's an omission that I just glossed over clearly because he definitely should be on there. So yeah, those two. Jerry Rice, I mean, the greatest football player to ever lace them up right there. So, yes, Jerry Rice. And we all know number 4, Ben. Would you like to do the honors?
Gosh, I mean, this feels like an obvious one to me. I think it's very clear who it has to be. It's going to be River Craycraft. That last
I didn't realize we're going to put a River. I thought we were gonna have. Is there a pool at the bottom of our river of our Mount Rushmore?
No. You know what? I'll be serious for a second, guys. Come on, it's got to be Mike Shanahan. I mean, if we're talking about the most important, no. I'm gonna stop joking. It's got to be Joe Montana. It's got to be Joe Cool, the guy himself, the greatest quarterback of all time until Tom Brady graced the NFL. But Jack, I think I saw Jesse agreeing with me on this one. He let me right to it. Do you have any disagreements with those two being the last two on the list?
No, I'm good with that, and I don't see him in our chat over here, but hopefully he watches this. So take that, Amin. Joe Montana on our
Oh man.
He was in earlier. I think he was making fun of me being underdressed at some point in here. I could be wrong. I know Waruna was, but I thought he was too. I could be mistaken about that, though.
Well, how about this, guys? Why don't we talk about the omissions that we left off this list? Is there anyone that sticks out to you guys in terms of someone you think should be considered for this list?
Ronnie Lott.
Yeah, Ronnie Lott would be the main one. I think that you're looking at would have to go on there. But I think you'd have to take off one of the executives in order to put him up there.
That's a really good one.
If it's okay, let's do just players real quick. So let's add Ronnie Lott. Who would be the 4th then on that list? Because that's where I think it gets really, really tough. I mean, we talk about guys like Staley. We talk about guys like Roger Craig, Willis. Who is that 4th? Is it? I mean, is it Dwight Clark for the catch? Like what?
I think it might. I'm going to say Dwight Clark, but I'm not afraid to say I'm wrong on that one.
I mean, as an overall player, it's definitely not Dwight, but what he meant in that moment is huge. Steve Young could be an option. I mean, there's a lot of guys. So, Jack, I'm going to put you on the spot. Who's your cemented 4th person as a player?
That is a tough one because I almost think that it's. maybe it's got to be Steve Young. I know I kind of disagree with you on that originally, but the more you think about it, just because of the fact that he won that Super Bowl and the All Pros and MVPs and things like that he put together and really kind of carried the 49ers through the 90s, I think it almost has to be Steve Young. I really like the one that the Dwight Clark would be another one, just as because he was there in the beginning. There's just so many of those guys. It's hard to really narrow that one down.
Yeah, and I see in the comments in terms of Korean 49er mentioned, in terms of non-executives, Carmen Policy, definitely someone who should be huge on that list of influential 49ers folks. So we're talking about non-players, definitely should be up there.
Yeah, and real quick, and this is kind of skipping off of the Mount Rushmore part of it, but the Carmen Policy throughout the 80s and 90s, I think that the role that he played, it was so important because he was the right-hand man to DeBartolo, and everybody knows that DeBartolo had a little bit of a temper, and so there was a number of times where he kind of kept this thing together by going back to and talking DeBartolo down. At least that's the way it sounds like when you read through things from that time period. Hear people talk about it, was that he was really talking, and what kind of kept Bill Walsh with the 49ers as long as he did, because DeBartolo was ready to fire him a few times, even before '88. So that's part, and then the other part about Carmen Policy is that's something that Jed York needs. I think Jed York doesn't have that kind of figure around him to as a guide. At least I don't think he does. If I'm wrong, somebody can hit me up on that. But if he had, I think the 49ers and Jed York would be good if they could would be very much helped out if they could have a Carmen Policy type figure that's on the outside but is able to be on the inside at the same time.
For sure.
Yeah, I agree with that. They definitely need a different influence involved in that building.
Yeah. I like this one right here from Tommy. He says, without the Seifert, there's no Legion of Boom. And he calls it the Legion of Whom. That's a good one, actually. That's a really good one. And then one other question that I just want to throw this one out there real quick. I know we're getting to the end here. But Linda threw this one out to us, and she says, why do you think the fines had anything to do with the injuries? It seems it was what happened during rookie minicamp when Lenore made contact with Watkins, and the video was put on Twitter. So, what do you guys think of that?
Again, I just don't know if we have all the information yet on this fine. What I'm hoping is that the NFL is going to be more transparent about what was really going on, why they were fining the team. Hopefully they'll release some kind of statement at some point. So I know 49ers fans are trying to figure out what happened. I just don't think we'll have that information quite yet. And honestly, I would wait for the league or for your Adam Schefters of the world more than anyone else to give us that kind of information anytime soon.
Yeah, what I'm going to say on that is that I think that I don't necessarily think the fines are because of injuries. I think the point that we were talking about when we were saying that was that the fines, the fact that they were fined, it shows that they were practicing a little harder than they probably should have been doing, and that could have played a role in the injuries. But the fines and the injuries are two separate pieces. Mm-hmm. But it's a really good question. It's an interesting kind of brings us back to how we started the show off. So. Just real quick, and then Harold makes a really good point here at the end. There's no 49ers without the catch. Clark, Walsh, Montana started all. Can't leave none of them out. Yeah, that's a really tough one. It's a really good point.
And Harold just followed it up with asking if any of the violations affect the cap or anything. It's a separate thing. They get fined. It has nothing to do with the 49ers salary cap table.
Yeah. Yep.
Well, hold on. Let me. I'm gonna grab something. I'm gonna show you guys something. Hold on.
Okay. All right, we get to have a little extra special display by it. Where'd he go? No.
No, we're doing show here on Sports.
I'm looking forward to see what you got here, Jesse. What do you got?
Oh wow, that is a great
signed Dwight Clark.
That's pretty sweet right there. Yeah, that's it right there. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And you got the picture of him signing it and everything.
Yeah.
That is really nice right there.
That's something.
Yeah.
Man, that's cool.
That's fantastic. No, Dwight Clark was he was really something. He was a really good person outside of the what we all remember him as a player. And so yeah. No, that's
And I was just going to say, I think that's kind of a common thing. You know, I hit on the Dr. Harry Edwards part of this earlier, but under Eddie D, the 49ers were really more than just a football franchise. If you look at them as a whole, the way they affected the Bay Area, the way they affected their community, I was just really impressed every time I learned more and more about Eddie DeBartolo Jr. So I just want to make sure I put that out there.
Yeah. Yeah, one last piece on Dwight Clark real quick before we wrap up is his whole story and how he ended up with the 49ers is the perfect story. And when it comes to about being in the right place at the right time and how big of a role that plays and the way things work out, because when he wasn't even on the 49ers radar, the 49ers went to Clemson to scout Steve Fuller, and Steve Fuller needed somebody to throw the ball to, and Dwight Clark happened to be his roommate, so he went out there and started running routes and catching passes, and the rest is history, as they say. So, any last words from either of you, Jesse or Ben?
Yeah, I got to get out of here. I got my show starting in about 3 minutes here, but come over to Last Second Sports. If you guys don't have your fix, I guess, for sports for the night, come over to Last Second Sports. We're doing a rate 'em and debate 'em, where we take multiple players and compare them against each other and then debate on who's better. And pretty funny comment. BMF Ranger says, "Wow, that's beautiful. Where do you live?" Tampa. I live in Tampa, so come find me.
I think they were talking more about Jack because Jesse, we can't quite see most of your background right now. But I was just gonna say for everybody, I got a beautiful background behind me, right? But no. Jack's gonna be on my channel tomorrow. Everyone can go check that out. It's just Ben Meyerson, my YouTube channel. Make sure you go check that out and subscribe. Got a ton of Niners content from the off season. Talk to a lot of different people during this. But tomorrow, Jack and I specifically, we're going to be talking some salary cap. Kind of talk a little bit more about what we scratched the surface with today on Grant's channel with the whole positional spending thing. So that should be fun for everybody tomorrow. So hey, make sure you check that out.
Yep, and I know that Jesse's got to run. I'm just going to say thanks to everybody that joined. If you guys could please subscribe to the channel and click the like button and pound that thing away, and make sure you set your notifications so you know when we're on, because next Thursday's show, we haven't announced exactly what's happening yet, but Jesse and I are super excited with who we're going to have as our guest for next Thursday night show. So make sure you're tuned in. And other than that, everybody, thanks for joining. Have a great night. Jesse, go kill it on your next show, and talk to you tomorrow, Ben. Have a good night, everybody.
Yep. Thanks, everybody.